So these are some of the hundreds of people who've shared their stories with me over the past few months. They've told me that since their loved one went to prison, they've been doing time in their own way. They told me about the holidays and birthdays they've missed, the distances they've had to travel, and the money they've had to spend to keep in touch with a person they love who's behind bars. These conversations that I had with them informed this project, which is a 5-day series that will publish next week in partnership with the New York Times race-related newsletter and the Marshall Project, a criminal justice reporting nonprofit. The project looks at the issues that face people with incarcerated loved ones, and I reported this with Nicole Lewis, a staff reporter at the Marshall Project who graduated from this school in 2016. It started with a call out. Nicole was looking into prison privatization, and she had heard about something called video visitation. These Skype-like video calls were being introduced in jails and prisons across the country. And in some county jails, they were replacing in-person visitation altogether. So we wanted to talk to the people who are actually using this service and these technologies. So we created a survey where people could share their experience using video visitation, submit recordings of their calls and receipts, and help us tell a story. But we couldn't just post this on the Marshall Project's website and hope that people would find it. We had to go out and find them. When I started looking, I quickly found that this is a population that's already really self-organized. They call themselves prison wives, which doesn't just refer to a woman who loves a man in prison. It refers to anyone who has a loyalty to someone who's incarcerated. They organize on Facebook and in online forums. They share tips and advice from their years of experience. They organize mutual aid projects like carpooling and clothing swaps. Once I started finding these groups, I found a lot of them, enough to fill a spreadsheet. But I still wasn't part of this community. I had to build some relationships. So I started just calling up the gatekeepers. I talked to the moderators of the Facebook groups and the admins of the forums. And I asked them, what are people talking about in your groups? I told them about some of my story ideas and asked them for their input. I also talked to advocacy organizations that work with family members of the incarcerated. And I tracked my outreach pretty relentlessly. I put a tracking code in my surveys so I could see exactly who was taking them and where they came from. I sent everyone I talked to a custom UTM code so I could see how my survey was traveling through social media. The responses from the first call out were promising. Heard from more than 150 people in 31 states, and 97% of them reported an issue with the technology. So now we had sources, 161 of them, and we had evidence. We had these receipts, we had these testimonials. So we had an accountability story. By the time I heard that the Marshall Project wanted to embark on a larger project about this population, they knew exactly where to look. I had developed this network of people with direct experience of the criminal justice system, and they were ready to help with our next project. We put this out just a few weeks ago at the end of November, and we've already gotten nearly 200 responses. Our first survey got 150 in months. So we had given people a space to share their experiences without judgment. One person who filled it out tweeted this. She said she felt like she had been asked, "How are you?" for the first time in forever. Another woman shared her story with me and told me I was the first person she ever told, but that she could tell by the work the Marshall Project was doing that we were trustworthy. 90% of the people who filled out our second survey said they'd be willing to speak to a Marshall Project reporter. When I first started this work with this community, just over half said that they'd be willing to speak to a reporter. I take this as a metric that shows trust, that people are willing to speak with the Marshall Project about deeply personal stories. So we have this network of people who are able to speak on their experiences and want to participate. The Marshall Project has a network of sources and newsletter subscribers and potential members too. This project grew out of the community-engaged criminal justice reporting that I've been doing throughout the program. When Queens elected its first district attorney in more than 3 decades, I wanted to make sure that the people who would be most affected by the outcome of the election had the information they needed about the race. So I went to them and I asked, what are the issues that you want to know about from the candidates? I took those questions to the candidates themselves, and I heard back from almost all of them. I published the result on the school's website, and I also made a printed voter guide so I could make sure that I was reaching people where they were most likely to find it, in libraries and community centers, and in jail. I organized a group of volunteers from the school to go to Rikers Island on a Saturday in May, distribute the voter guides, and tell people about the election, answer their questions, and help them understand their voting rights. I've also been collecting food diaries from people in prisons across the country for months. And I used some of the food diaries they sent me to create a project for the Marshall Project's Instagram. We had an illustrator create drawings of some of the food logs they sent us, and I posted them for a week in real time so Marshall Project readers could have a window into incarcerated life. But I knew that the people who really needed to see this story weren't on Instagram. They were my community in prison. So I adapted my Instagram story into a prison food zine, which included the excerpts from my food diaries along with resources on prison food and nutrition, and crowdsourced commissary recipes. These are things that would be useful to someone in prison. I also worked with a man named James Bainbridge to document his first few months on parole after being released from prison for a photo essay for the Washington Post magazine's prison issue, which is made up entirely of writings and art by people who are currently and formerly in prison. Throughout these projects, I've developed a sort of checklist for myself, and it's how I've judged this practicum project. I started by listening to my community when they told me what they needed. I created new opportunities for them to participate in the reporting process, and by extension, changed the way the Marshall Project approaches crowdsourcing, creating new opportunities for people to report with the Marshall Project's reporters. I presented my findings in a format that was accessible to them and that they could act upon. And I hope that this project will go on without me. I hope that the Marshall Project will continue to tap into this incredible network of people with direct experience of the criminal justice system to tell future stories. And I hope that the people who participated feel like they're part of a community, and that by sharing their story with me, they made a difference in something bigger. Thank you.